Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to preview Jupiter's upcoming entrance into the sign of Pisces. Now, this is something that I will be doing more videos about because it's hard to cover everything in one take, but this is an exciting transit. Jupiter is giving us a taste of both Aquarius and Pisces in 2021, and then in 2022, we're going to get a lot more of Pisces, followed by Jupiter's entrance into Aries. So it's important to um, start understanding this Jupiter transition, because when Jupiter changes signs, it also, in ancient astrology where we use whole sign houses, will change houses. And anytime a planet ingresses into a new house, it tends to make a splash and really highlight the activities of that house, or the potential benefits of that house, especially with Jupiter. So, what I want to do today is just start to prime the pump so that we can get the water flowing with Jupiter moving into Pisces, and give you a sense of what to watch for. I say this also as a qualifying remark that we will be looking at Jupiter in Pisces again in May when it actually transitions. So there will be more detail to come. So just a little general look today at this upcoming movement. So I just have the traditional 7 in for now, and we're going to just keep it that way for today. The reason that this is significant is that essentially by this weekend, Jupiter is going to be entering the last 5 degrees of Aquarius, which it will cover between now and about the middle of May. So about 1 month left of Jupiter in the sign of Aquarius before we get a nice long exposure to Jupiter in Pisces. So here's what happens. Let's go forward 1 month. And you'll notice that about 1 month from now, in the middle of May, right about this is May 10th, Jupiter is about to change signs. So it changes signs essentially on May 13th. And you can see into the 14th, there it is, Jupiter's transitioned into Pisces. Now, this transition is a big deal for a couple of reasons. One is that for the past several years now, Jupiter has been in Aquarius and Capricorn. Capricorn is a sign of Jupiter's fall. Aquarius is another Saturn-ruled sign, and Saturn has been in Capricorn and Aquarius, so it has been Saturn's city for the past couple of years. When Jupiter gets into Pisces, remember that Saturn is going to follow suit by 2023. So we're starting to shift gears, and Saturn is going to start playing out through the lens of other planets. So when Saturn plays out through the sign of Pisces, it will be corresponding with Jupiter. So Jupiter things are essentially going to start rising in the next few years. That's good news for most of us who, for example, have been in quarantine, or have been, dealing with lots of restrictions in our lives. Jupiter changing signs is a good sign of things growing and expanding and greater freedom. And it's a really auspicious transit because it's in its home sign. This is its feminine domicile. It's a water sign. And so we have it's the on the yin side of the spectrum. And Jupiter also has a masculine domicile in Sagittarius. It's a little bit different in Pisces. And we'll be talking about all of that in May when it actually transitions. For now, what I want to mention is how important it is to track out the cycles of Jupiter in order to understand what is most likely to happen. So this is something you can do now to start preparing, because in the next month, you're going to start seeing the transition happen. Even though it hasn't changed signs, the momentum is already coming. It's sort of like saying, look, a person is walking down a hallway, and at the end of the hallway is a door that leads outside. You're standing outside looking through the glass door at them coming down the hallway. They're still in the building. They have not left the building. They're still in it, but they are on their way out. And when you can see them coming on their way out, the transition of your meeting them outside of that building is about to already happen. So it's right about this time, when you have about a month left, that you want to start thinking, okay, what's the transition that's about to happen right now? And you can look at that specifically by looking at the whole sign house that Jupiter is going to fall in your birth chart. So let me just show you how that's going to work, like in my chart. I'll just give you an example from my own life. You'll see that Jupiter will ingress into my 11th house. So I would start looking at beneficial, strong, generally positive Jupiterian kinds of things coming into my life through 11th house topics. That's the general way that you would read that. Now, what I also want to emphasize is looking back in time at the previous Jupiter cycles in order to understand what you might expect. So let's go back in time now, and I'm just going to walk this back to the last time that Jupiter was in the sign of Pisces. So here we're looking at the, actually, I went a little bit too far. Go. So when you're looking at Jupiter entering Pisces, we're talking about January of 2010. So you can see Jupiter entering Pisces right here. Now I'm going to fix, let's just fix Taurus on the ascendant. So that's my rising sign, just so that I don't have to keep dealing with this moving around. So here's Jupiter having entered Pisces in the 11th house. And this happened in about January of 2010. So I would look back at that time of my life and say, what was happening? And then I want to trace out the total amount of time it spent in Pisces. So it was in that whole sign, 11th house of Pisces, from January of 2010 all the way until about June of 2010 when it ingresses into Aries. What's interesting about that is that, Jupiter flew through Pisces between January and June of 2010. And then what happens? Well, you're going to get it Jupiter's going to dip into Aries a little bit back in 2010, and then it retrograded back out. So here it is coming back into Pisces by September. So January to June of 2010, Jupiter was in Pisces. Then from about September all the way through December, it's in Pisces and just hanging out there and then moving forward again. Now, by that time, the time that it gets out, it's about January of 2011. So you're about 1 year that you're going to see always for Jupiter once it enters a sign until it leaves a sign. This is why Jupiter's cycle is about 12 years around the zodiac. So you're going to see about 1 year per sign. So January 2010 to January 2011. Look back on your life during that period of time and ask yourself what was happening. You'll see in my chart that it was in the 11th house. So let me just give you a sample. So in January of 2010, I was awaiting the publication of my book about ayahuasca. It's called Fishers of Men. And it was a book that I wrote that was being published by Tarcher Penguin. In the scheduling was in the summer of 2010. So at that time, what I was doing was starting to put together a radio and book touring schedule, as well as there was this meetup group community called Evolver. It was connected to a web magazine that I wrote for called Reality Sandwich. And I'd been on a team that actually launched Reality Sandwich. I think it was in 2007 or 2000. Yeah, it was 2007. So this was a very big deal for me because I was going to these meetup groups called Spores. They were sort of like psychedelic community meetup groups. Anyway, so these groups were a big part of the scheduling of my book tour, as were the actual bookstores and radio programs and things like that. So Jupiter enters the 11th house, and I'm starting to make all of these very interesting connections within the larger community of people who are interested in psychedelics and plant medicine and shamanism, and they were just pouring in. It was basically organization and implementation of a publicity tour for my book. And I made so many friends and contacts that I would end up collaborating with creatively. During this same time, I also got involved in a yoga studio community in New York City. And by the beginning of it, I was just attending classes. By the end of it, I was managing the studio. And then during that process, there was an astrologer who had an astrology group that she held out of the studio, and I became involved in that community. And that was by that summer when I ended up launching Nightlight Astrology. So it was all of these different communities, astrological, yogic, the publicity tour, all of these kinds of different kinds of community and allies, and things like that. Then during the midst of that, I launched my donation-based astrology school. It was a meetup group in Chelsea, and I managed to find someone who let me rent a meeting space in Chelsea that for really affordable. So I had kind of almost like a benefactor that like gave me a really good deal, and that without that I wouldn't have been able to start my business. And then I also met several, just happened to meet several celebrities who were also interested in ayahuasca. There's a lot of people who are interested in ayahuasca. After I wrote my book, I had several different people, minor, major celebrities. It's all debatable, but it was pretty big for me at the time because I never met someone like that in my whole life. And a few of these people actually ended up becoming donors to my school. Like when I was first getting it started and I needed some capital to get my business off the ground, I had several people that really believed in my work that pitched in, not like anything astronomical, but just small amounts to get me off the ground, to be able to pay for rent, and so forth. Now, at the same time, what's interesting is that at the very beginning of this period, when I also had to collect unemployment for a little bit because I was between jobs, and then the yoga studio that I started working for kind of went under. So then I had to collect unemployment. The 11th house was also associated with the government's money or benefits or resources that might come from authority figures, say like the government. So I just thought you guys might find that interesting to hear a little biographical details about that portion of my life. Now, you can go back even further. So what happens if you take it back another 12 years? Typically, they're going to be in 12-year increments. So if we go forward, let's see here. Whoops, going backward. Make sure I've got this right. Okay, there we go. So the last ingress before that happened right here in February of 1998. Right there. Now, in February of 1998, Jupiter also entered the sign of Pisces, and here is what happened. Jupiter goes all the way through Pisces and then retrogrades by the summer of 1998, comes all the way back, goes forward again, and is finishing up in Pisces by February of 1999. So you're talking about winter of 98 to winter of 99. So if I go back to that period of my life, what was happening? Two things were happening. Between 1998 and 1999, I became the president of a statewide council of youth ministries. So I was a youth pastor in a Christian setting for a while when I was younger. And during this period, I was becoming the president of this youth ministries organization in Minnesota through the Methodist Church. And at the same time, I had found a new youth group community. I wasn't going to my own youth group. I was trying to, at that time, my father was starting to have sort of a nervous breakdown, and I didn't want to go to his church anymore because of it. And there was a lot of turmoil in my family. So I started going to a church youth group community with my girlfriend at the time and became very deeply involved with that youth group and then this larger youth ministries program. And it was a really positive patch for me because it was keeping me out of a lot of trouble, I'll say. So at any rate, there's Jupiter in the 11th house of groups and friends and allies. At the same time, I left high school and started going to community college early. Your junior and senior year in Minnesota, I don't know if they still do this, but you can actually opt out of high school and go to college and start getting your credits done, and they count double for high school graduation and toward your college graduation. So I did that, and I began, almost every class that I took was philosophy. And so I was getting involved in philosophical community. And a lot, like my life started to revolve around intellectual, academic, and philosophical communities. There's Jupiter in the 11th house. During that same period of time, I also basically started to, it sounds really weird. To me, it wasn't weird at the time, but I started smoking pot. I had some friends that were what I would call like very, not like people who smoked 24/7, but people who were artists and, people who did well enough in school. Like they were not, they weren't kind of like whatever, couch potatoes, like just smoking pot all day. These were people who, like, were getting shit done. They were in school and they were artists and they were fascinating people to me. And those people entered my life. And really, because of those people entering my life, my spirituality started evolving. And I would attribute that community of people in my life at that time to what, and as well as the philosophical community, as to what brought me sort of out of Christianity and into a more universal exploration of faith. So at any rate, those were really, really, important times in my life. Now, here's the other thing. If I go back even farther than that, you can go, I mean, this is just for some, I know some people watching this may be old enough to go back 3 cycles or whatever. So might as well take it back and see what else is there. Now, what's so interesting about this is that when you look, and I won't go through the whole thing, but when you look at Jupiter going into Pisces around 1986, what's so fascinating about that is when my father, coming out of seminary, took his first church, United Methodist Church in Minnesota. And I entered into my first church family as a preacher's kid. Jupiter was also entering my 11th house at that time. And that, of course, would shape my life for many years to come. So the point of all of this is that if you go and look at the whole sign house topics of Jupiter and return to those same time periods that I just outlined, you can get a feel for the kinds of events and themes that are going to be prominent. The good news is that Jupiter in its home sign of Pisces is generally very positive, which means that you're going to tend to see a kind of fertile, growth-oriented period around whatever the topics of that house are. And that's the promise of what you're going to start to see between May and July of this year as well. And then by the end of the year, the very end of December of this year, Jupiter, after going back into Aquarius, will reappear in Pisces. So you'll get another dose of this for a good portion of 2022 as well. We'll review all of that when I come back to this in May, and I will also go through all of the 12 houses again in May. But for now, I think that you've got to take a look at those periods and go, well, what was going on in my life at that time? What was Jupiter doing? And remember that Jupiter as a planet tends to point to, in a broad philosophical sense, Jupiter is the lawgiver, the order provider, but not in a Saturn kind of way where you might think of strictness or something like that. No, it's more like the legal system or a democracy or the ideal, your faith or your belief that you live in an ordered, harmonious cosmos. Jupiter is the great cosmic orchestrator that keeps everything together in cosmic wholeness and justice. That's Zeus, and there's problems with Jupiter too, but that's its philosophical ideal. Jupiter can have a shadow side like any other planet. So when Jupiter's in the fishes in the water sign, you're going to see the idea of that larger sense of that larger ideal, whether it's philosophical or faith-based, or whether it's part of a community, or if it's a new system or way of doing things at work, or it's some sort of Jupiterian theme entering your relationships or finances. You always want to be careful when Jupiter's in a water sign. It's very fertile, so you can get pregnant pretty easily while Jupiter's in water signs. Also, Jupiter in, when Jupiter's in a water sign, things grow, but things can grow quickly, and sometimes out of proportion. Eating too much, sleeping too much, anything that's a little escapist in nature, potentially with Jupiter and Pisces. So anyway, there's some things to watch for. And like I said, we'll try to revisit all of this again down the road. I want to remind everybody, if you like this kind of stuff, my new course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, starts again in June. Registration is open. The early bird rate is in effect. We have people signing up this week already. I'm really excited for you guys to be in the program. It's a year-long program, 30 courses on the year, 30 lectures, about 3 hours each. We also have 12 guest lectures, so 42 classes in the year, in total. Also, there are, reading assignments throughout the whole class, bonus material. All of this is optional, of course, optional homework assignments and quizzes, a group forum discussion that's pretty lively, breakout study sessions that are optional in addition to the 42 classes. We also have a good staff of people now who are there to help with questions. I'm available by email throughout the whole year. It's a great way to get that spark transmitted from, people who do astrology, me as your teacher, but also a community of people who do astrology in a certain way, using traditional techniques. It's very consistent. It's not idiosyncratic. It's not something I made up. It's part of a tradition. And it's really nice to be able to have that really structured, stable way of learning how to read charts and knowing where all the theory comes from, understanding the underlying philosophy of ancient astrology. So a lot of reasons to really love the course, because it's really the best thing I've made in my whole life, I think. So at any rate, aside from my kids, so at any rate, if you guys are interested, check it out on my website, nightlightastrology.com. If you have any questions, email us info@nightlightastrology.com, and we will see you again tomorrow. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.